You're staring at two listings side by side. One is a 42-foot center cockpit ketch with 3 cabins, teak everywhere, and a broker telling you it's the perfect family boat. The other is smaller, plainer, $10,000 cheaper, and something about it keeps pulling your eye back. You've got kids or grandkids and a dream about taking them somewhere blue, and right now you honestly don't know which one is the mistake. Here's what my investigation found, and it flips almost every piece of advice you've been given. The boat that gets recommended most for families is usually the boat that ends up sitting at the dock, unsailed, draining money. The honest way into sailing with kids is smaller and simpler than the brokers will ever tell you because they don't earn a commission on restraint. I know this because I've walked these decks. I stood in a street Petersburg boatyard a few years back under the swing keel of a Morgantown Island 41, notebook in hand, adding up a rigging bill that already crossed $12,000 before I'd even climbed aboard. And by the end of this, I'll show you the one number from decades of surveyor haul-out records that decided the whole ranking for me, going all the way back to Frank Butler's first Catalina, 36 in 1982. This matters whether this is the first cruising boat you'll ever own or the second one you're upgrading into. Let me start with the myth, because it's the one that costs families the most. Walk any dock and ask which boat is right for kids, and someone will point you at a big center cockpit cruiser in the 40 to 42 foot range. More cabins, they say, more privacy, more room for the family to spread out. And on paper, they're right. The Morgantown Island 41, drawn by Charlie Morgan and built in Street, Petersburg, Florida, starting in the early 1970s, gave you a walk-through aft cabin, a shoal draft of just over 4 feet, and enough volume below to raise a family in. More than 1,000 of them were built. The Whitby 42, designed by Ted Brine and built by Whitby Boat Works up in Ontario, became a legend as a family circumnavigator, a full-keel center cockpit ketch with a genuine aft stateroom and a reputation for crossing oceans with children aboard. So what's the problem? The problem is that nobody tells you what those boats ask of you before they'll go anywhere. That Morgan I stood under had a mast that needed unstepping, standing rigging older than the teenager whose parents were thinking of buying it, and a balsa-cored deck that rang hollow and wet under a plastic mallet across a third of its area. The listing called it turnkey. The listing said, "Bring your toothbrush." The survey I watched being written said something very different, and the RECOR estimate alone started near $15,000 and climbed from there. That's before sales. That's before the engine. That's before you've untied a single line. And here's the trap that snaps shut on families specifically. A 42-foot ketch is not a boat. One adult sails, while the other watches the kids. It's a 2-adult boat on a good day. The moment one parent is below settling a seasick 8-year-old, the other is alone on deck with a 50-foot mainsail, a mizzen, and a boat that weighs over 20,000 pounds and does not stop quickly. The size that was supposed to buy you comfort just took away the one thing you actually need with children aboard, which is the ability to handle the boat short-handed when everything goes sideways. So the big boat wins on paper and loses on the water. But that raised a sharper question for me, and it's the one that reshuffled my whole ranking. If size isn't safety, then what actually keeps a child alive in a cockpit at sea? That's where the next comparison got uncomfortable. Here's a criterion no listing will ever print. How deep is the cockpit well? How fast does it drain? And how high is the sill your child has to fall over to go into the water? Because that, far more than length or cabin count, is the part of the boat that touches your kids every single hour they're aboard. Let me put two contenders under the same light. The Beneteau Oceanis line, I'll use the 400 and the 423, drawn by the French offices of Groupe Finot and Barrett Racoupeau, and built in France through the 1990s and 2000s, gave you a wide, shallow, open cockpit, wonderful at anchor. You can seat 8 people around a cockpit table and feel like you're on a patio, but that same openness means a shallow footwell and low coamings. And when the boat heels, there's very little boat between a small body and the lifelines. The transom on many of them is open or barely gated, beautiful in a marina, a place you watch your children like a hawk the second the wind picks up. Now put the Island Packet 380 next to it. Bob Johnson designed it, and Island Packet built it in Largo, Florida, in the late 1990s. Deeper cockpit well, higher bridge deck, a real sill between the cockpit and the companionway drop, and a hull built with that thick foam cord polycore layup the yard was known for. It's slower, it's heavier, sailors who race will sneer at it, but it holds a child in the cockpit the way a good high chair holds a toddler, and when a wave comes over the rail, the bridge deck stops it from pouring straight down the companionway onto the kids below. That's the difference the glossy photos hide. The wide-open Beneteau cockpit that sells the dream at the dock is the same cockpit that makes you nervous at sea. The deep, boxy Island Packet, well, that looks dull in the listing, is the one that lets you breathe when the boat heels and a 7-year-old is clipped in beside you. So on pure safety of the cockpit, the heavier full-keel boats pull ahead. But before you run out and buy the heaviest boat you can find, understand this: that same weight and that same build quality come with a maintenance bill that has ended more family cruising dreams than any storm ever did. And that's where the money starts to bite. Let me talk about the number that actually decides whether you go cruising or just own a boat, because it isn't the purchase price. It's the annual cost of keeping the thing alive, and it scales in ways the broker never mentions. Start with standing rigging, the wire that holds the mast up. Surveyors and insurers increasingly want it replaced at somewhere between 10 and 15 years, regardless of how it looks, because fatigue cracks hide inside the swage fittings where your eye can't reach. On a 36-foot sloop with a single mast, a full rig replacement runs you somewhere around $8,000 to $10,000. On that Whitby 42 Ketch, you now have 2 masts, more wire, longer spreaders, and a bill that can push past $18,000 or $20,000. Same job, double the pain. And it comes due whether you sailed 100 miles that year or 0. Now the deck, both the Morgantown Island and a lot of production boats from that era use balsa-cored in the deck, and balsa-cored plus 30 or 40 years, plus every deck fitting that was ever bedded and rebedded, equals water intrusion. A soft, wet deck isn't cosmetic, it's a structural recore. And once a yard opens it up, you're looking at $15,000 to $25,000 in half a season on the hard. The Island Packet's foam core resists that rot far better, which is part of why it holds value, but you pay for that quality up front, and the boats in good shape don't sell cheap. Then the engine. A tired old Perkins or Yanmar diesel that won't hold compression is a repower, and a repower with installation lands between $15,000 and $25,000. Once you count the new engine, the mounts, the alignment, the exhaust, and the yard time. I've watched buyers celebrate saving $8,000 on the purchase price of a boat whose engine was about to hand them a bill 3 times that size. And here's the quiet one that catches everybody. Insurance and haul out both scale with length and with the underwriter's opinion of the boat. A 42-footer costs more to haul, more to store, more to bottom paint, and more to insure than a 36-footer every single year forever. Added up over 5 years of ownership, and the gap between a well-chosen 36 and a tired 42 isn't a few $1,000s. It's the difference between having a cruising fund and having a payment book. So the cost math punishes the big boat again, and it rewards the buyer who chose restraint. But I promised you something for the people watching who already own their boat, who are sitting there thinking this whole comparison is only useful to first-timers. Stay with me, because this next part is for you specifically, and you can check it this weekend without a broker and without paying for a haul out. If you already own a cruising boat, here's what I want you to do before your next sail, and it comes straight out of everything this investigation turned up. Grab a plastic mallet or even the heel of your hand and tap your way across the side decks and the cabin top, especially around every stanchion base, every cleat, and the mast step. A solid deck rings sharp and bright. A wet, delaminating core answers back dull and flat, like knocking on a wet cardboard box. Map the dull spots with painter's tape. You just did the first 10 minutes of a marine survey for free, and you now know whether that recore bill I mentioned is in your future. And when you're crouched on that side deck with painter's tape in your hand, mapping the dull spots yourself, you start to feel it. The honest information was there all along. It just never showed up in the listing. That feeling is exactly what the Complete Sail Smart system was built to give you every time, on every boat you look at. It's the only 3-volume framework put together from real cost numbers, the true architecture of what a boat actually costs to keep alive. 6 blue water ready boats and exactly what they share, and a catamaran versus monohull comparison done as forensic financial math instead of dock folklore. It hands you the questions the broker won't ask himself, so you walk the deck already knowing what a soft core or a tired rig is really going to cost you. And here's a free test you can run tonight, right from your chair. The landing page says 406 pages of real content. Go count the chapters listed there yourself before you trust a single promise I've made. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. There's no launch clock and no fake deadline on this. The reason to look now is simple, that ownership cost is already running on any boat you're circling, and every week you decide blind as a week, it keeps quietly draining you. Look at the collection while it's on your mind, then come right back, because we're not done narrowing the short list, and the ranking is about to tighten around one boat. Then do 2 more things while you're aboard. Measure your cockpit drains, put a tape across them, and think honestly about how fast that cockpit would empty if a wave filled it while your kids were sitting in it. Small drains on a deep cockpit mean water sits, and water sitting in the cockpit means weight in the worst possible place. And finally, pull the cushions off a settee and look at where the main bulkhead meets the hull. That bulkhead is glassed or tabbed to the hull, and on older boats, that tabbing lets go. If you see cracking, gaps, or a bulkhead that's pulled away even a little from the hull, you've found something that matters far more than a fresh coat of varnish, and you found it yourself for nothing. That's the point. The honest information was always there. It just isn't in the listing, and it isn't in the broker's patter. Now, back to the short list. Because we've narrowed it and the ranking is about to tighten around one boat. We killed the big boat myth on handling and on cost. We gave the deep, well-built cockpit the safety win. So you'd think the answer is simply buy the Island Packet and be done. And the Island Packet 380 is a genuinely excellent family boat. I won't take that away from it. But there's a catch that only shows up after you own it, and it's the same catch that quietly disqualifies the whole heavy displacement category for a lot of families. These boats need wind. An Island Packet, a Whitby, a full-keel cruiser built to shoulder through an ocean wants 15 knots to come alive. Take that same boat out on a soft summer afternoon and 8 knots of breeze, which is exactly the kind of gentle day you want when you're introducing children to sailing, and it barely moves. It wallows, the sails slat. The kids get bored. And bored kids on a boat that isn't going anywhere is how you raise children who never want to go sailing again. I've seen more family cruising dreams die from boredom in light air than from any dramatic failure, because the boat that was built to cross oceans is a slug in the exact conditions you'll actually sail 80% of the time. So the heavy boat wins on safety and loses on the water where you'll really use it, and the light boat wins on the water and loses on safety, which means the honest answer isn't at either extreme. It's the boat that sits in the middle and does neither thing badly, and that's where I want to bring in the contender I've been holding back. Frank Butler's Catalina 36, built by Catalina Yachts out of Woodland Hills, California, from 1982, with well over 2,000 hulls produced across 2 long-running versions. On paper, it's the boring choice. It's a production boat, it's not exotic, no teak-drenched interior, no circumnavigation legend attached to the name, and that reputation for being ordinary is exactly why it's underpriced and exactly why smart families keep quietly buying them. Here's what the investigation showed. Once I stopped listening to dock snobbery and started reading refit logs and survey notes, the Catalina 36 is a moderate displacement fin-keel sloop that will ghost along in 8 knots of breeze and still take a family safely out in 20. It has a real aft cabin and a real forward cabin, genuine separation, so the kids get their own space and so do you, which on a family boat is not a luxury. It's the thing that keeps everyone sane on day 4. Single mast, so your rigging bill is half the catches. Moderate length, so your haul out, storage, and insurance all sit in the reasonable band instead of the punishing one. And because Catalina built so many, parts are everywhere. The Owners Association is enormous and generous with knowledge, and every quirk of the boat has already been documented by someone who fixed it before you. Does it have weaknesses? Of course. The early boats have a deck step mast with a compression post below that you want to inspect for any sign of the cabin sole sagging. Some hulls show the classic grin at the keel-to-hull joint that needs attention. The original rudders on certain years are worth a close look, but every one of those is a known, documented, checkable item with a known cost, not a nasty surprise waiting to blow your budget apart 2 years in. Known problems with known prices are exactly what you want. It's the unknown ones that bankrupt people. So the ranking is nearly set, but I told you at the start there was one number buried in decades of surveyor and haul-out records that decided the whole thing for me. And it's not a number about strength or speed or comfort. It's about which of these boats families actually keep sailing, and the answer is going to sound backwards until I show you why. Here's the finding that no comparison video will give you, and it's the one that quietly rearranged everything. When you look at the pattern across yard records and owner histories, which boats stay in active use with families aboard, and which ones migrate to the back row of the boatyard and become projects that never splash again, the dividing line isn't quality. It isn't the builder's reputation. The Whitby is beautifully built. The Island Packet is beautifully built. The dividing line is whether one adult can rig, launch, and sail the boat alone in an afternoon. That's it. That's the whole secret. The boats that keep going out are the boats a single parent can handle, while the other one is dealing with the kids, the lunch, the sunscreen, and the meltdown. The boats that die at the dock are the ones that require both adults, full attention, and a 2-hour setup. Because the honest truth of family life is that you almost never get both adults, full attention, and 2 free hours at the same time. The 42-foot ketch doesn't fail because it's a bad boat. It fails because it demands a crew you don't have on a random Tuesday, and a boat you can't easily sail is a boat you slowly stop sailing. Follow that one insight, and the entire ranking falls into place. The Beneteau Oceanis is easy to sail, but I can't put children in that open cockpit with a clear conscience. The Morgantown Island and the Whitby are safe and roomy, but they demand 2 adults, and they punish you every year on rigging and upkeep. The Island Packet is the safest of the lot, but it needs wind you won't always have, and it costs the most to buy right. And the plain, unglamorous Catalina 36 sits right in the sweet spot, saleable by 1 adult, safe enough for kids with a few cheap additions like proper jack lines and higher lifeline netting, cheap enough to keep, forgiving enough in light air to keep the kids interested, and separated enough below to keep the family from going to war on a long weekend. The honest comparison always existed. It just never got run, because the boat it points to is the one nobody makes a big commission selling and nobody brags about at the yacht club bar. The sellers had every reason to steer you toward more boat, more cabins, more length, more money. But the surveyors' yards told the real story in the quietest way possible, by which hulls kept getting bottom paint and which ones grew weeds on the trailer. And now you're holding that verdict before you spend a dime. So if you want my ranking, here it is, plainly. For most families getting into cruising, a clean, well-sorted Catalina 36 or a boat exactly like it in size and philosophy is the honest way in, and I'd take it over the 42-foot Dreamboat 9 times out of 10. Move up to the Island Packet 380 if you're genuinely going offshore, and you'll have 2 capable adults aboard every time. Look hard at the Whitby 42, only if long ocean passages with a full crew are the actual plan and not just the fantasy. Walk carefully around the Morgantown Island unless the deck is dry and the price already accounts for a rigging replacement. And love the Beneteau Oceanis for weekends and warm anchorages, but respect that cockpit before you trust it with a child at sea. The thing I want you to walk away feeling is this: you are not underbuying by choosing the boat you can actually sail. You are buying the seasons your family will actually spend on the water instead of the ones you'll spend writing checks in a boatyard. That's not settling. That's the whole point, because you're not the kind of buyer who wants to be sold the dream. You're the kind who wants the honest verdict even when it's less romantic than the brochure, the one who'd rather know the truth at the dock than learn it the expensive way 2 years and $40,000 in. That's exactly who I make these for. So tell me where you are in this. Which 2 boats are you weighing against each other right now? Is it a big center cockpit ketch against a plain production sloop, the same fight I laid out today? Drop it in the comments, Name the contenders on your short list and tell me where you're watching from, because I read them and I answer them. And if you want the honest comparisons, the brokers will never run for you. Stay with me, because next I'm pulling apart the two boats everyone calls bulletproof blue water cruisers to show you which one hides a chain plate problem that only surfaces after the sale and why the survey almost never catches it in time. If you've stayed this far, here's where we go next. Inside the cruising compass, I walk you through the full 5-boat ranking, boat by boat, the way I actually weighed them. And you can ask me your own question right there. I answer you myself, not some machine. You're not sorting this out alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime, one click. I'm Marcus. Come aboard. Now, once you've picked the right boat for your family, the next question is how to buy a used one without getting burned. I'll walk you through it gently and honestly in the video starting right here.